From the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and I'm Reverend Charles Harrison. And on this episode today, I'm going to be talking about a couple things. We have had a very I say in the last 10 to 12 days, a very violent time in the city of Indianapolis when it comes to youth violence that impacts young men of color between the ages of 12 and 24. Want to kind of talk about that. You know, I've really been kind of outspoken on this issue. I have for decades now, and you know, I've been vocal this week. And the second thing I want to talk about today is, you know, my opinion of this whole issue with trade, globalism versus this whole now movement of American first and bringing back, you know, manufacturing back to America. It's not an easy, you know, topic really to come to a conclusion about, but certainly I'm gonna give it a swing. So stay tuned and join me today on Real Talk. Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and I am so glad to be with you today on this podcast. It has been certainly a beautiful day today here in the city of Indianapolis, and you know, I'm excited. To be here. It is Friday, and for me, Friday becomes a very busy time for me as I prepare to get ready for Sunday. I've been out walking today and have gotten my 4-mile walk in today. I didn't really do any running today, but I did get my 4-mile walk in. And for those who follow me, you know I am an advocate walker and I do run. I'm a type 2 diabetic, so over 20 years ago when I was diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic, I started this regimen of exercising at least 5 to 6 days a week, where I do 4 miles, and most of the time I'm doing a 4-mile run and walk. My knees don't hold up like they used to as I've gotten older, but at least I get that 4 miles in, if sometimes it's just walking. And it's really been good for me, helping me to stay healthy, control my blood sugar, and I have been, you know, diligent in that. So feeling real good today here in the studio as I do my podcast, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about, you know, what I've really been vocal about over really the last 26 years that I've been a part of a faith-based organization called the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition, and I'm one of the founding members of the organization that was started in 1999, and really the conversations occurred in 1998 when the city was experiencing a high level of criminal homicides in the city. And where my church is located, it is in one of, at that time, one of the worst zip codes in the city. And the neighborhood that my church was located in at that time was called the United Northwest area. I think now they call it the near Northwest area of Indianapolis. And most people are familiar with 29th and MLK. That's one of the hot spot areas in the city. And, you know, I got involved in this issue really because of my concern about the disproportionate level of violence that was occurring, particularly with young men of color. I was certainly impacted by it at a young age when my older stepbrother was killed in Louisville, Kentucky. So I've been on that side of the fence, and I understand the pain that families feel. I've also had a nephew that's been killed by urban gun violence at the age of 23. So brother at 21, nephew at 23. And I grew up during a time where, you know, this whole issue of urban violence was really beginning to bubble up in America. I graduated in 1979, so I've gotten old, but I can go back and begin to talk about what was beginning to happen, in cities all across the country, where we were seeing gangs and drugs and the impact of urban violence. And what has really been dear to my heart over those years is the disproportionate impact of urban violence on communities of color, particularly impacting young men of color. When I started doing 10 Point in 1999, it was a focus of our organization to try to reduce the frequency of violence that was impacting young men between the ages of 12 and 24 years old. When you look at that 12 to 24 years old, really when it comes to 15 to 24, nearly half of the homicides of black males in America, or let me go back, nearly half of the deaths, of black men between the ages of 15 and 24 were homicides. So almost 50% of the deaths of black men between 15 and 24 years old were homicides. That's a startling number. Between the ages of 1 year old today and 44 years old, the leading cause of death is homicide. So I've really been outspoken about that. I haven't been shy about that, to talk about particularly the issue of black-on-black violence. I have not been popular because I have been outspoken on that, but I believe that it's a crisis. Over the last, 10 to 12 days, we have seen the ugly head of this kind of violence that disproportionately impacts black males occur in this city. Several Sundays ago, on the far east side of Indianapolis, there was a young man, 19 years old, that was killed in an apartment complex that really had been doing good since February of 2020. There hadn't been a homicide in that large section of the Carriage House East apartment south of 42nd Street since February of 2020. But a couple Sundays ago, that Sunday morning, a 19-year-old was killed. We didn't at first know the circumstances around that, but later I've learned that it may have been over a robbery, that a robbery attempt had occurred, and the 19-year-old was killed. Later that Sunday, there was another double shooting that took place right next to the Carriage House East Apartment at the mobile gas station. Apparently, in that shooting, there were two groups of young men, and I think there was they were meeting to buy and purchase tennis shoes. Something went wrong in the exchange. From what I've been told, those who came to sell the tennis shoes, their true intent may have been to rob the buyers. Something occurred during the transaction, shooting occurred, and the two of the individuals that was there as buyers, one was shot and critically injured, but he did survive. The other was shot, and I guess he ran to try to get help, to get away from the area, and he collapsed not far from the shooting. It may have been maybe a block away where he collapsed and later died. So there were two youth that was killed, a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old, both African Americans. But that wasn't the end of it. We had another situation where an old boyfriend and a new boyfriend and a young lady, there was an incident. I think the old boyfriend was there to visit with the mother of his child, which was his old girlfriend. That must not have settled well with the new boyfriend. The new boyfriend comes to the location, shots are fired. The old boyfriend is shot. He also runs trying to get away, and he also collapses and dies. The victim was 19 years old. So we had two 19-year-olds and a 17-year-old killed. And then the big thing that has occurred this past Sunday was we had another incident between a 14-year-old, two 15-year-olds, and the 18-year-old really had nothing to do with it. He was the brother of a 15-year-old who had his friends over, and apparently there was some kind of gun exchange. In the midst of what was going on, I guess that exchange went bad. Shots were fired, and the 18-year-old brother must have been, at the door or in the room when it occurred. He gets shot and killed. 14-year-old gets shot and killed. 15-year-old gets shot and is wounded. He survived, and then a 15-year-old is arrested. Now there are several issues here that was troubling to me. In all of these incidences, we have had a 14-year-old killed, we have had a 17-year-old killed, and we have had an 18-year-old killed and two 19-year-olds. So that's 5 young men of color who have been killed in about 2 weeks. Very troubling. 5 young men. Remember, I just told you that between the ages of 1 year old and 44 years old, homicide is the leading cause of death among black males. I said between the ages of 15 years old and 24 years old, almost 50% of the deaths, what we call premature deaths for black males, is homicide. We had a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old, and two 19-year-olds killed. There's 4 individuals within that age bracket of 15 to 24 years old. And then you had someone that was killed, a juvenile, at 14, just 1 year away from that. This is the concern that we have in the black community. Now, I'm willing to talk about it. I'm willing to talk about this issue. I know it's not popular, but we cannot continue to put our head in the sand and not talk about this issue. I know it's a tough issue. I know a lot of people like to focus on, what are the root causes that is driving this? And people have various viewpoints and opinions about this. But the reality is that homicide is the leading cause of death for black men in this country between 1 year old and 44 years old. Blacks who are juveniles, and some consider 24-year-olds still youth. That's why 10-point goes from 12 to 24. We had in Indianapolis, within the last 2 weeks, we have had 4 individuals killed between the ages of 15 and 24 years old. Are you not troubled by that? Now here's the issues that is concerning me. I've been doing 10-point, like I said, for about 26 years now. When I first started doing 10-point, and we would run into a lot of juveniles on the street. Back in those days, in 1999, everybody wasn't packing a gun. That's just the reality of what was going on. The reality today is that just about everybody's packing. And I'm stunned by the number of kids who have guns. I remember 7 years ago driving down Riverside, or Harding Street in the Riverside neighborhood, and I know those kids could not have been no more than 11, 12, 13 years old. I know they couldn't. And I was with my wife, and we were driving down Harding, and I noticed a gun in the hand of what I believe was a kid that looked no more than 12 years old. And I was stunned by that. I was stunned by that here's a kid that I know that's no more than 11, 12, 13 years old, and there he was with a gun. But the sad reality is that is more and more prevalent today. There is this proliferation of guns in the hands of juveniles. Now, I know in the state of Indiana, you have to be at least 18 years old to get a gun. But here we have, and it's not just Indianapolis, it's in cities all across the country, particularly in these large urban cities. You have this large number of young juveniles with guns. What is even more of a problem is you have other juveniles who are not selling drugs, who are not hanging out in gangs or cliques, who are not involved in criminal activity. You know, these young people are trying to do the right thing. They have a vision and purpose for their life. But some of them are so fearful now because of the others who have these guns that they feel like now that they need a gun to protect themselves. So now you have individuals who are in the game, who are selling drugs, who may be in gangs or what we call neighborhood cliques, who may be involved in criminal activity, robberies and stuff like that, who are carrying guns. Some of the individuals who are not involved in any criminal activity at all feel intimidated by those who have guns. So now they feel like they need a gun. So we have people who are involved in criminal activity, who are juveniles, who have guns, and young adults. And then we have other juveniles who are on the straight and narrow, trying to do the right thing, who are in school, who are athletes, but they feel like in order for them to survive in the neighborhoods, in the areas that they live in, or at the school that they attend, that they have to have a gun to protect themselves. So here we have this proliferation of guns on the streets. The second problem that we have is that now, because young people don't have good conflict resolution skills, they don't know how to be in conflict and disagreement without escalating it. Since they don't fight no more, and they don't fight anymore with their fist, they pull out these guns because nobody wants to back down. Nobody wants to be viewed as weak. And if they get in a fist fight and the other person wins the fight, and now if it's put on social media, they don't want it to go on social media and it shows that they got whooped, that someone beat them up. So because of their egos and wanting to maintain a reputation and not be teased and talked about, they pull out the gun to resolve the situation. So here we have generations of young people, particularly in the urban core, who have no conflict resolution skills at all, but yet they have juveniles' guns. So they have guns in these immature minds, these guns that these young people have that have been glorified by rap music and videos. It's cool to have it now. Now they're using this against each other. So most people automatically associate it that it's drugs and criminal activity that's leading to this. No, a lot of times it's just interpersonal conflicts that get out of hand, and people are pulling out guns to try to solve their conflicts. For those of us who are older and 50 years and older, back in our day, we resolved it with the fist. They're not doing that anymore. The third thing that troubles me, and I'm talking about it, I'm not afraid to talk about it. The third thing that troubles me is what seems to be some parenting issues. Oh, I know I'm going to get in trouble now. I know I'm going to get in trouble now because I'm talking about parents. I've raised 4 children. I don't understand why you don't know what your child is doing if you're paying attention to your child. Why is a 15-year-old sitting in someone's house in a bedroom trying to exchange a gun? And you don't know anything about what your child is doing? You're not paying attention to who your child is hanging out with? You don't know whether or not that child may have that gun in your house? See, I'm having a hard time with this, and this is one of the issues. And I know some parents and some single parents, whether it be the father or the mother that's trying to raise the family, I think that is a problem too. I do. I think the breakdown in the black family is an issue. I think we have too many fatherless homes. It is an issue. I know a lot of you moms are trying to do your best in raising these big old boys. And sometimes, by the time these boys get 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, they're towering over their mothers. They're big and they're strong. I know that. But I believe children need both parents. I believe girls need a father in their life as much as they need their mother. Boys need a mother in their life as much as they need a father. Because part of the problem, I think, today is that young people, too many of them are being raised in the streets. They're being raised by the video games and the rap music that is promoting a lifestyle that is destructive to them. But yet this is the reality of what's happening. I have a 19-year-old son. He got himself in trouble not long ago because he got into a fight. My son took a baseball bat from someone, and then in the midst of the fight, he pushed the back door where the girl and the boy was, and my son ended up getting in trouble. He ended up getting arrested. He ended up going to jail. Now, as a father, regardless of what the circumstances are, I'm not tolerating that. The reason my son got himself in a jam is because he was hanging around the wrong people. Now, when he was still in school, me and the mother had a tight rein on him. When he became grown, then he started making bad choices when he became 19 years old. Hey, but because my son still lives in my household, me and my wife are putting a greater rein on him. And I'm trying to say to him about who he hangs with and the things that he does led him down the wrong path. Us parents are not our children's friends. We need to be their parents. And too many parents out there, you're trying to be the friend of your children. Are you so young that you're still trying to live your life and you're not paying attention to your children? I'm not allowing my son or daughter to bring no gun in the street. And when they're hanging around people that I don't feel comfortable with them hanging around, and I see something in those friends of theirs or acquaintances, whatever they want to call them, that is disturbing to me, I'm going to say something. I don't let my son bring any friends in his house that me and my wife don't feel like our son ought to be hanging around. And too many of us parents are not paying attention to what our children are doing. We're not paying attention enough, or if we do know, we're not saying nothing about people that they're hanging around with that you know are up to no good. You can't have no gun as a juvenile. You're underage. Regardless of what the circumstances are in the streets. I used to be in the streets too. If you're hanging around the wrong crowd, you're more likely to get into something than hanging around with people who are trying to go places and do something positive with their life. That's my message with my son. You hang around the wrong people. They're not trying to go nowhere with their lives right now. Why are you hanging around somebody who wants to be a thug or a gangster or sell drugs? And parents, we got to know that when it comes to our children. You can't let a thug in your house or a gangster in your house. What do you think they're there for? The mother of the 18-year-old said, of the 15-year-old, she let the devil in her house. That's what she said on TV. I let the devil in my house, who ended up killing my son and a 14-year-old. Yeah. Because we have to be parents. When I was young, there were certain people that my parents would not allow me to hang with because they could see in them what I knew, but I chose still to hang with some of those guys. That's how parents used to be. Oh, no, you can't bring him over this house, or you're not allowed to hang out with him. If we don't have parents, and let me say something to the fathers. Fathers, you got to do better. We got to do better. These young men need us. They need positive role models in their life. You ought to be their role model. Not the drug dealer, not the rapper, not the basketball player. But fathers, you ought to be the role models of your son and your daughters, because you ought to be a man of such character that when your daughters grow up, they're looking for a husband like their father of great character and moral values. But Father, there's some things that we have to teach our sons. There's some things that we ought not to allow our sons to be involved in. We ought to be in their life. We ought to be teaching them what is right and wrong, helping them to develop a moral compass and not be so hardcore that they have no regard for the sanctity of human life. Baby, that starts at home. That starts with mama and daddy. If your kid is a monster as a juvenile, that starts at home. Yes, mom, yes, dad. Because that child should not have that kind of mindset as a juvenile. And they're growing up in your household. The character development of our children starts at home. Yes, schools and churches can play a role, but it starts at home. And the reason we have so many juveniles in the black community carrying guns is because they're starting at home. We got to do better as parents. Mom, maybe you have to raise them by yourself, but you got to raise them. You got to set boundaries, and you cannot allow your boys to do what they want to do, go where they want to go, and be a part of something that you know is not right for them. If there was better parenting, there would be less juveniles with guns. If we did a better job of parenting and getting these children involved in stuff. My mother kept me involved in stuff when I was growing up. That's why I was good at all sports. She kept me involved in sports. And I know some people may say, well, we don't have the money for our children. There are a lot of churches and groups out here that are helping young people connect to those churches and groups. If more young people were going to church, that would help too. Because what the church did was it helped develop thou shalt nots. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother, that your days on earth will be long. Those are the things that we were taught. You wouldn't have all these kids disrespecting their parents. But we're not going to curb the urban violence issue if we don't first start at home. I know there are root causes, but I'm telling you, it starts at home first. It starts with having strong families. We're not going to survive this when 70% of black children are born out of wedlock. About 47% of black children end up juveniles growing up in a two-parent home. We have to improve those numbers. Less children need to be born out of wedlock. And we need more children who are growing up in two-parent homes, or at least daddies, if you're not going to be with the mother of your child, be involved in your children's life. I can spend all this time talking about racism and the conditions that exist in the urban core and blah, 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 blah. When people get, on this thing about all these root causes, I know. But I'm telling you, it starts at home first. You fix the home, you're going to fix this problem. And then we can deal with all the other issues that people want to throw up because they don't want to deal with the reality of what's really going on. Well, I'm going to say it. Regardless of other people getting on social media, bad-mouthing Rev Harrison, I don't care. I'm going to speak the truth. We have a problem. What's going on in black America is different than any other ethnic group in this country. And it's because of the breakdown in the black family. That's where it starts at. That's why things have gotten out of hand. That's why you got these kids in gangs and juveniles in gangs and carrying guns and selling drugs. It starts at home. You ain't going to be no child in Charles Harrison's house, Reverend Charles Harrison's house, and you ain't going to be selling no drugs. You ain't going to be in no gang. You ain't going to be coming in my house with no guns. You ain't bringing no thugs in my house with guns involved in criminal activity. Ain't going to happen. You ain't going to stay out all night. You got a curfew, and you better be in the house when your curfew comes. If I say you got to be in the house by 11 o'clock, even if you're 19, you got to be in my house by 11 o'clock. You don't set the time that you're going to come in my house. And I want to know where you are at all times. I want to know where you're hanging with, who you're hanging with. And at that age, you're going to have a job. Those are boundaries and standards. When my son got in trouble, I didn't criticize nobody. He got himself in trouble because he made some poor decisions. So me and my wife started holding him more accountable because I don't want him to be the next statistic out there. I don't want him to be a suspect or a victim of a violent crime. I know the pressures, but I tell my son, you need to stop hanging with people who are more likely to be involved in that. So parents, I'm not just talking to you, I'm talking to myself too. But if we want this to be better, we lost a 14-year-old within the last 2 weeks, a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old, and two 19-year-olds. 5 young black men killed in Indianapolis within the last 2 weeks. That means we have 5 grieving families that have been impacted by urban violence. And you have a 6th young man, 6th and 7th young men who are fighting for their lives in the hospital. We got to do better. Well, no, son, you're not going to go to the gas station to make a buy for tennis shoes. No, we're not doing that. Why you got that gun? Give me that gun. Because if you're carrying the gun as a juvenile, when you're not supposed to have the gun, the chances are great it's going to lead to some trouble. I've been there. That's why these young people can't tell me nothing. I grew up in the streets. I've been there. I know. I didn't hang around people like that. I was trying to do something with my life. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to go into ministry. So I was hanging around people who wanted something out of life like me, who was going to college. Whatever they want to become, that's who I hung with. I wasn't hanging with those who want to be thugs and gangsters and sell drugs. Parents, we got a role in that when it comes to our children. I thought I was going to get into the thing with the tariffs and the whole thing about that, but I get it on another show. This has been so good that I couldn't let it go. I'm going to continue to talk about this. Rev Harrison, Rev Charles Harrison, I'm not shying away from the issue of black-on-black violence. I'm not. I'm going to talk about what I believe are the driving factors. I'm willing to have a discussion with people about root causes, but I'm telling you, unless we fix it at home with parenting and getting these kids in church, keeping these kids in school, making sure our sons and daughters are getting their education, if we're not doing that as parents, then we're not setting the right kind of foundation for our children to be successful. And I know all of us parents want our children to be successful. Don't think because you live in a bad area of town that you can't steer your child in the right direction. You can. Parents, we got to do better. If I'm making my children do better, you're making your children do better, you're making your children do better, then the neighborhood's going to be successful. If you're not allowing your 15-year-old to have a gun, and your 16-year-old, and your 17-year-old, your 14-year-old, my 19-year-old, no, son, what do you need a gun for? I'm trying to tell you in our community what it's leading to. And if we did a better job as parents, there would be less guns on these streets, less violence, and less people dying. I think we can do better. This has been Reverend Charles Harrison and my podcast, Real Talk. I try to give it to you real. I hope that those of you who are listening to me, that you would go to the All Indiana Podcast Network at Wish TV and check out my podcast. I'm asking that you share it on Facebook and X and other social media sites. And one day I'm hoping to have a call-in show on my podcast and talk to people so that we can talk about a lot of other issues. But I hope that you would do this. I'm going to put this now on X, and I'm going to put it on Facebook so you can check out this podcast today. As I talked about urban youth violence and this impact that it's had in the city of Indianapolis just in the within the last 2 weeks, 5 young people have been killed, 2 other young people have been injured. We can do better. This is Reverend Charles Harrison. I pray that you have a blessed and awesome day. Until next time, peace.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.